So kudos to the organization here at Autism Speaks for keeping things organized and keeping things on time. So it's great to be in front of so many people who are dedicated to helping autistic individuals to lead fulfilling and productive lives. And today I'm going to talk about some thoughts I have in terms of transitioning to adulthood as we're moving forward, as we're opening the doors to making success, be it employment, be it higher education, and generally in adulthood, making this success the rule rather than the exception. So as we move along, let us start by crawling into the mind of the autistic person with the game of what's the difference between the picture on the top and the picture on the bottom? Who's got a difference? Who wants to tell me one? Looks like Bridget has something to say. Okay, so that's a good start. Yeah, absolutely. And what else do you see? There's about a dozen more. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, one is blue and one is red. Yeah. On the floor? Yeah. Somebody dropped a nickel or something on the floor. Yeah. What else do you see? Okay, the horse in the back has a kind of like a cowlick on their head on the top, but not on the bottom. And here's the rest of them. So there they are. So as we think about what we were looking at, now it's time to take a quiz. What was this a picture of in the first place? It's a carousel, we got that. What animal was in the foreground? Zebra, not a horse? Okay, just checking. What color is the animal behind the first one? So we're not exactly sure, and the last question is even harder to answer. Well, I bring this up because what I did is I forced you to perceive these pictures like most of us autistic individuals perceive the environment. We tend to focus on detail, sometimes to the expense of the whole. And when using a deficit-based model and talking about autism, we call it a deficit in central coherence. Now that said, what situations exist where it's advantageous to be detail-oriented? Who's got one for me? Cybersecurity, what else? Looking at pictures of carousels and determining differences, yep. Something. Data management, IT, geeky-ish type things. All right, there you go. So in thinking about these things, might it be possible to say that if we put a typical person in such a situation, could we state that they have a deficit in detail-oriented thinking? And somebody says, oh God, yes. So the point here is that we can take what is so often considered as deficits and flip them over and consider them as strengths. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that happen here. We're seeing that happen in other places where companies, small software companies, such as Microsoft and SAP, Apple, and so on, have identified and realized that us autistic people can do things sometimes that nobody else can do, and in any case, many times, better than other people can do, faster, easier, and more efficiently. So they're recognizing this, and they're actively seeking autistic individuals. And that's an important aspect of transition to adulthood. We all need to work for a living. Now that said, as I think about all this wonderful press and research, and well, not that much research yet, research that's going to be, and well, what's being done in supporting autistic individuals in geeky type areas, it's important to realize that we're not all IT geeks. As a matter of fact, it's a minority of us who are IT geeks. It's a big enough group to write about, and to take note, and it's really cool to write about these superpowers. But my question always is, what about everybody else? What about those of us who have strengths in the arts and other areas? And included in the everybody else, what about people who perhaps need more supports? The people who, we're looking at a population where perhaps we give a 40-hour training in soft skills and employment, and then they're off and running with a little bit of support, but they're pretty much doing their own thing. But there are others who perhaps need more supports, such as a hypothetical case. Actually, it's a real case, but I changed the name to protect the guilty, but we will use the name Bridget. And Bridget loves to do nothing more than pull laundry out of a dryer and fold it perfectly with creases. So what are the employment implications as we look at the characteristics, as we turn away from a model of deficit, disorder, and disability and look to a model of ability, communication? Well, Bridget occasionally speaks 1 or 2 word phrases, 1 to 3 word phrases, uses PECs with an iPad. And by the way I'm looking at this, I didn't say Bridget is nonverbal when we actually mean non-speaking. She's not, I didn't say non-speaking and has to use an assistive communication device. That's a deficit-based model. I'm looking at it using an abilities-based model. This is what she does. She does have a few words here and there. She uses PECs with an iPad. That's how she communicates. Enjoys time with and has a good sense of humor with people she knows. That's a positive way of looking at it. The negative way, which we so often use, limited and predictable social interaction. Restricted interests. Well, maybe we should call it a focused interest or a passion. Oh, by the way, anybody who wants to take pictures, go have a party and take all the pictures you want. Now, this stuff is meant to be shared. And if you email me later, I'll send you a copy in living PDF color. So this is her passion. This is what she likes to do. We don't always know why these passions or how they come about, but that's what she likes to do. And she will fold your laundry too. How many of you would like help folding your laundry? Well, you're going to have to pay her to do it. The actual person behind this is in Florida, and you have to pay him to do it. That is his job. He likes doing it. He's contributing to society. He's fulfilled. And the person outperforms the typical coworkers because they like to do it. Now, that said, I'm talking about strengths. I'm talking about abilities. What about those challenges? How many of you believe that autism brings significant challenges? Everybody's hand should be up. Yeah. If it didn't, we wouldn't be here trying to figure it out. It wouldn't be an Autism Speaks. We'd be doing something else. So how do you know what a person is good at? And when somebody asks me that question, I return it with a question. How do they spend most of their time? People tend to spend more time doing things that they're good at, that they like. What people like, they tend to be good at. So again, reframing how we consider these characteristics. Instead of starting off with a deficit in fill in the blank, let's just call it differences in. You can even use the same D, it's still a D word, you can use the same letter, but it's a difference. It's neither good nor bad, and we find ways to use them for good. So my question is, what are the abilities? What are the interests? What kind of mind does the person have? How do they think? And there's a myth that all of us autistics are visually based. And I believe that the key is that, well, probably most of us are. But key word is most, not all. I know some non-visual autistics who are so non-visual they can't read a map. They can't navigate, but they got strengths in other areas. What are the characteristics? And one characteristic of autism that's not often mentioned is the idea of a widely varying skill set. We're a study of extremes. So what that means is that the stuff we're good at, we're incredibly good at. The stuff we're not so good at, we need a whole heck of a lot of support. but you don't find that much in the middle. So this mythical average, you might say. If you average all of our skill sets, you get a nice average in the middle, but there's none actually there because they're either way up there or they're way down there. So what it means is taking the words that we so often see in reports and in discussions, be it in school, be it in employment, and wherever, and reframing them. Looking at things more positively, asking the question, what can the autistic person do? And that's what brings me to the 3 A's of autism. 3 A's of autism. And it starts with awareness. That's when you become aware that autism is in our midst. We've been doing that for the past 20 years or so. We've gotten pretty good at it. And then what so often happens with that awareness, and be it a parent, be it an organization, be it even an entire country, there is this incredible rush to gather all this kind of information and cure it. Get rid of it. Get rid of this horrible thing that's afflicting my autistic son, grandson, daughter, whoever it might be. And nobody else has done it, but through sheer determination, we're going to do it. And then, after awareness, usually around the teenage years, transition age, there comes the sense that, well, maybe this autism thing is here to stay, and maybe it's not so bad, and there's actually things that can be done with it. And from there, we move to appreciation. And that's where we see autistic individuals valued for who we are, for what we can contribute to society. So in this conference, and as you go on after this conference, my charge to you is, what steps are you going to take to climb these stairs of awareness, acceptance, and appreciation of people with differences in your lives? So that brings to mind Autism Speaks. And I've been seeing a great evolution from when we started. 12 years or so ago, when Autism Speaks popped into existence, it was this great gathering of information. A grandchild had autism. It was this horrible thing that was affecting this child. And this child was having some real difficulties, digestive and otherwise, getting along with people, learning, whatever it might be. And we got to find ways to fix it. We got to get rid of it. But as I got to know people in Autism Speaks, I found that there were people who were interested in promoting successful lives and supporting autistic people, starting with the toolkits. And there almost seemed to be like this kind of dissonance. Let's cure and get rid of autism, but at the same time supporting people with autism. And that's when I saw Autism Speaks moving into the acceptance phase. There were autistic people working, such as Carrie Magro in the New York office. There were attempts by people to get information from autistic individuals. And then maybe about 5 years ago, I began to see a real change in Autism Speaks appreciating what autistic people can bring to the environment. With 2 autistic people on the board, Valerie Paradis and I, the 2 first autistic people on the board, the changing of the mission statement, removing cure in favor of lifelong supports, acceptance of people on the autism spectrum. Maybe in the next go-around we'll get appreciation in there too. And we're moving along, and now we have conferences like this where we have good participation by autistic people who are valued and recognized for the contributions that we can make towards helping autistic people lead fulfilling and productive lives. So I've seen Autism Speaks climb these stairs of awareness to acceptance and appreciation of autistic individuals. And I see this on the individual level, I see it in parents, See it on countrywide levels when countries first begin to realize, such as Russia, China, and various others, well, we've got a lot of autism here. What are we going to do about it? And what I find really encouraging is that these countries who have had to enact special education laws after signing on to the United Nations Convention for the Rights of People with Disabilities, which also included education as a right, that they realize we're not sure what we're doing, so we're looking for help. And they are looking for help from organizations such as Autism Speaks, from other organizations, from myself. And we're all doing our best to help these countries perhaps short circuit or leapfrog over the mistakes that we've made in terms of awareness, acceptance, and appreciation of autistic individuals. So what brings me here to talk to you about autism? Well, things were pretty typical at first. And at 24 hours of age, my wife says I look like an egg. Then, at 18 months, like what happens to about 30% of us, the regressive autism bomb exploded. Loss of functional communication, meltdowns, withdrawal from the environment. So in brief, I became a pretty autistic little kid. There was so little known about autism in those days. The questions: where does autism come from? What do we do about it? So on that note, let's all sing to the tune of Where Oh Where Has This Little Dog Gone? Ready, go. Where, oh, where did this autism come from? More from the back. Oh, where can it be? Andy with the tenor. With mysteries cut long and eye contact cut short. Oh, where can it be from? All right, not too bad. We pretty much sang together, but I think with a little work on intonation and breath support, we'll be ready for the winter concert. Questions remain to today. What we do know a lot more about is how to support autistic individuals. What can we do to support individuals? Well, at that time, it took my parents a whole year to find a place for diagnosis. And when they did, the doctors said they had never seen such a sick child. And fortunately, my parents, like we see so many parents today, they advocated on my behalf and they convinced the school to take me in about a year. And it was during that year that they implemented what we would today refer to as an intensive home-based early intervention program emphasizing music, movement, sensory integration, narration, and imitation. So it probably looked like one of the more developmental approaches we have today. But in those days, it was just parents trying to reach their kid. And what did they do? Well, first they tried to get me to imitate them. How many of you have used imitation to teach somebody something? Sure, you've all done it. I bet even Bridget has done it. But sometimes with us autistics, it doesn't work. So then they flipped it around and imitated me. Once they did that, I became aware of them in my environment. Then they were able to move me along. And I believe the key implication is that before you do some solid good work with autistic individuals, you have to build that trusting relationship. You have to build a bond. And that's what Autism Speaks has done, and that's what it continues to do, and that's part of the climb to appreciation of autistic individuals. And we're now working side by side to improve lives of people on the autism spectrum. So the work my parents did, spoken communication began to return at age 4. I believe we have the technology, we have the know-how, we have the wherewithal so that autistic people leading fulfilling and productive lives can become the rule rather than the exception. So rather than looking at the closed door of deficit, disorder, and disability, we can look at the open door of ability. And rather than autism being a bomb, autism now becomes da bomb. How does autism become da bomb? Well, I see some I see a lot of people here who might be considered as da bomb in autism. And why is that? Because supports were provided. So who do I see as da bomb? Well, I'm probably most familiar with Bridget over here, who's da bomb in autism. Her mother advocated for her, provided her for what she needs. Now she's out there, she's employed, she gives presentations. And there are increasing numbers of us who do that. Oh, and what about Andrew here? Well, let's say Andrew is a young adult, and his interest is in transportation system information to lost patrons at Penn Station. Again, we look at the characteristics. And how do they play out in such a situation? Well, Andrew speaks, probably talks too much, and he's detailed, factual, data-driven, truthful, repetitive. You don't know anybody on the spectrum who's repetitive, do you? No, I didn't think so. But how many times have you asked someone to repeat directions when you're lost? So maybe it works. Social interaction. Well, in a job like this, there's fewer decisions in the branches in the decision tree. And it's a little more predictable. A brief greeting, a request for directions, the person goes away. Where does Andrew get this information? His coworkers have to look it up in a reference. This is a focused interest. And again, because he's autistic, he outperforms his typical coworkers. And that's how we need to be looking at supporting autistic individuals, and as we move on through employment, higher education, and other aspects of adult life. So here I am back at age 4. I entered the school that initially rejected me. I got reevaluated. Instead of being considered as psychotic and ready for an institution, I got upgraded to neurotic. Things are moving up in the world. I discovered watch motors. I was found taking apart a watch with a sharp knife by my parents, pop open the back, take out the motor, disassemble that, play with the gears, put it all back together again. The watch still worked, and there weren't any pieces left over. So incredible fine motor control to take apart a watch. But where does that motor control go when it comes to penmanship? How many of you know autistic people who are penmanship disaster areas? One of the worst experiences I could have in grade school would be to walk into a room with a paragraph on the board, because that suggested that we were going to have to copy it. It would take me all period to get through a few words, and everybody else had gone to recess. So my parents noticed this. Instead of looking at the closed door of disability, disorder, and deficit, they looked at the open door of ability. Zoom provided all kinds of other devices to take apart and to put back together again. So again, looking at the abilities. So what am I doing talking about my life as such a young kid when we're talking about transition? When does transition start? Well, it used to be mandated at 14, then with the reauthorization by George Bush, it got up to 16. And this is a great number as long as we pull really hard at the 1 and yank it right off. When does transition start? As far as I'm concerned, transition starts as soon as you know somebody's autistic. So if we look at my situation at age 4, maybe it would have looked like I would have been a good watchmaker, watch repairman. I would have enjoyed doing that, would have needed a lot of support in terms of communication and living as an adult. That's what it looked like at that point. But at least it could have been something that I could do. And then just kind of follow that as it plays along. One thing that we're really horrible at is prognosis. I've seen so many situations where somebody's been given up as too low functioning or some other horrible designation. But that person ends up leading a fulfilling and productive life. So if we follow along with those interests and use the motivating power behind those interests. And what I found is that autistic people who are successful have found a way in which to parlay their interest into becoming a regional, national, or even international expert on a particular subject. So let's move on to college. I was teaching a course in electronic music, and I gave the assignment, list the components of the electronic music lab and briefly summarize what each one does and how they're connected together. So a student came up to my desk and said, "You know, I've got enough ADD to sink a battleship." And like for us on the spectrum, he had difficulty with penmanship, and his writing was really slow. He said, my writing is so messy you can't read it, and I won't be able to finish it. I might as well take the F now. And then he seemed to think for a moment, and he provided his own accommodation, which means that if we listen to autistic people, like Autism Speaks is doing, then we'll get a treasure trove of information on what's needed. He said, how about if I draw a map of the studio? And then it was my decision. Should I take the typical route? Well, you're in college now. College students should know how to write. If you can't write, we've got plenty of developmental courses you can take. Go take a year of developmental courses and then come back. And I know you'll get an A because you're really good on the equipment. Or, what am I really after? Has he mastered the material or not? So go draw a map. And he did, and it clearly demonstrated that he mastered the material. So it's important to know what you're looking for as well in assessment, and what's important and what isn't important. Is writing important? Yeah, it is. I grade my students on writing all the time, but it wasn't a requirement for that particular assignment. And if it was, we now have technology and we have many ways in which to assist an autistic person in getting their words out. So being aware of where the strengths are and what that person needs in order to master or demonstrate mastery of material. Here I am at age 6, regular school kindergarten. I was a social and academic catastrophe. You know what happens to people who are different in grade school. I suppose saying the letter B over and over again didn't endear me to my classmates. Now, a good thing is that school systems are beginning to realize that bullying is not a developmental phase that people need to go through, and that something needs to be done about it. Grade-wise, I was usually about a grade behind in most of my subjects. However, I was happy to go to the library and read all the books on whatever I was interested in at that time. It might have been aviation, it might have been a science of some sort, taking notes, copying diagrams, and there I'd be sitting in the back of the room and kind of doing my own thing. And they didn't even have the word inclusion in those days, but they might have called it inclusion. And I think probably for better rather than for worse, because there was so little known about autism, they just left me to my own devices. So advocacy is important. Promoting successful advocacy for autistic individuals. And that starts with how we refer to ourselves. And at this point, most autistic people appear to prefer being identified as autistic individuals. And that's why I've been saying autistic person as opposed to person with autism. However, there are a number of us who also prefer person-first language. So when in doubt, just ask the person. We've taken the word back. And autism just describes a situation. It's neither good nor bad, and we find ways to make it good. So self-advocacy. Another vital part of successful transition to adulthood. Let's take a look at how that works, because everybody engages in self-advocacy in some way or another. So let's say you're driving somewhere, you're lost, you ask for directions, here they are. Of course, you're going to memorize all these directions, but just in case for some reason you didn't, what's the first thing that happens? You realize there's way too much information to remember. So then you say, hold on a moment, can you wait while I get something to take this down? Thank you very much, I won't remember it all. Thanks for waiting. So what did you do? You scanned the environment for challenges, such as what Valerie Paradis writes in her book, The Self-Advocacy Curriculum. I don't know if Valerie's here or not. Is she here at the moment? Oh, well, anyways. In her book, The Self-Advocacy Curriculum, she talks about the need to scan the environment for challenges. That's something I'm always doing, usually for lighting or noise and various other aspects of the environment. You identify that challenge, you then advocate in a way the other person can understand and provide support. Then you have to give a reason why. That's the disclosure. So let's take a real-life example. I'm being shown my work office by my supervisor. And I see that it's lit with recessed lighting fixtures. Many of you may think that this hat's a fashion statement. And in many ways it is. And it's always good to support your university whenever possible, so they have Adelphi University. But it's really an accommodation. Because for me, standing under recessed lighting fixtures is like looking into a spotlight for most other people. So this works out really well. So back to the advocacy example. Here's my office. Looks great. However, it's lit with recessed lighting fixtures. That's the scanning of the environment. Now I need to advocate. Yeah, I wonder if it's okay if I wear a hat. Even though I see that nobody else in the office is wearing a hat, this hat will be really helpful to me because these lights are really bright. They give me a headache. I must have sensitive eyes. That was the disclosure. So it was that simple, took just a couple of minutes. It was something that the supervisor could understand and provide support. They don't even have to supply the hat. I've already got it. And if I'm really on top of my game, I might even throw in, and if I can wear this hat, I'll be much more productive for your organization. So that's an example of self-advocacy. And then there are some subtleties as to when to advocate, how to advocate. And perhaps one good way to look at it is that if the effect of being autistic significantly impacts a relationship or a situation, and there's a need for better mutual understanding, now it's time to start developing an advocacy plan. So here is my class in statistics. Would there be a need for me is there something for me to advocate for in terms of being autistic to my class, teaching math? And generally, probably say no, because being autistic doesn't significantly impact my relationship with the students. However, there might be a small thing, and that is part of being autistic means difficulty in remembering faces. And it takes me all semester to begin to remember my students' faces. So back when I was teaching statistics, I wasn't aware enough about all the ins and outs of advocacy, so I didn't do anything. But I just didn't recognize my students. But now, had I known then what I know now, I probably would have said something to the effect of, well, if it looks like I don't recognize you outside of class, it's because I don't. And the reason why is that I'm really horrible with remembering faces. So that's the disclosure piece. Now comes the advocacy. It will help me if you reintroduce yourself to me outside of class if you have a question. That's also why I have my students write nameplates and put them on their desks so that I can match the name to the face. It doesn't seem to help very much, but at least in class, I can call people by their names. So in that case, there might be a partial disclosure. Disclosure doesn't have to always be full. I don't mention autism. But then again, if I'm teaching a course in diagnosis and intervention in autism, or educating students on the autism spectrum, like I'm going to do this afternoon, right after this presentation, I'm going to dart out, fly to Boston, and teach a course at the Boston Higashi School on that very subject. Then I would do a full disclosure, because being autistic while teaching a course on autism, that significantly impacts my relationship with the students. So that's like the 5-minute tour of self-advocacy, and it's a vital aspect of leading a fulfilling and productive life. So here I am at age 8. Spent hours cracking open small rocks with a big rock, was fascinated by the shiny specks inside. That grew into an interest in geology, geography, many others. I remember about this time I had a stack of astronomy books on my desk, and a teacher told me that I'd never learn how to do math. But somehow I figured out just enough math to teach statistics at the university level. So just a little bit. Interests and strengths, everybody learns better about what they're interested in. If you're interested in something, you're probably good at it too. For autistic people, it's to a much greater extent. Bicycles started becoming interesting to me. Maybe it had to do with all of the rotating parts. And I got it to a point where I could take a bicycle apart down to the ball bearings and put that together again. So maybe at this time, it looks like spoken communication is pretty good. Still might need some support with adult living, but maybe I could work as a bicycle mechanic in a bike shop fixing bicycles. And as a matter of fact, that's exactly what I did in high school and then on through college. More about that later. Interests. We've got a lot of them. How many of you know autistic people where this might be a reasonably good definition? It's a deficit model. What if we flipped it around and said an interest of such great intensity that it provides powerful motivation for learning mathematics, for learning other curriculum, for exploring career opportunities. And that way we can use the motivating power behind the special interests. And here are some of my interests. They come and they go. Sometimes there's more than one of them at a time. Make sure you get them all, because there will be a quiz at the end. At age 10, I was awfully concerned about the letter E, because I heard you have to drop E before adding ing. Wasn't that E going to get hurt when it fell to the ground? I had a friend who said he felt like a pizza. He didn't look like one, he didn't smell like one, so there were some issues there. I remember a class being interrupted by an announcement the principal had lost his mother. So what does that mean? I think you know. She died. Usually we have to go through the idiom, she passed away. Oh, what does that mean? Oh, she died. Yeah, so that made me think about what my parents would tell me when I lost something. They'd say it was in the last place you left it. So I thought I could be really helpful to the principal if I suggested, if he thought really hard as to where he last saw his mother. No, it didn't go well at all. We think literally. Maybe it's because we have difficulty perceiving the nonverbal cues that make up, or the typical nonverbal cues that make up to 93% of the total interaction package. So we might be getting as little as 7%. So if you only can depend on words, maybe you'd be more literally minded, because we don't pick up when someone is telling a joke, using sarcasm, engaging in the use of an idiom. Ask one of us to hold the door. Or, I'll get to your question in a minute, says the supervisor. How many of us autistic people are counting the seconds down? What happens when you don't get back? The black and white thinking. Is that a deficit? Or can that be a strength? And it depends on the situation. And that's what we need to be looking at. We can either put our efforts into changing autistic people to be poor imitations of non-autistic people, or we can help autistic people be the best autistic people we can be. And I think we'll get a lot more mileage at working on being the best autistic people we can be. Middle and high school, you don't need to be autistic to have difficulties in middle and high school. But for me, it was actually easier because I figured out that using words instead of sound effects from the environment helped with social interaction. I also started to engage in my focused interests, music being one of them. I joined the band. Now I had a structured activity in which to mediate my interactions with others. I became a band geek. I got it into my autistic head that I needed to learn how to play all the instruments. So I'd spend hours in the instrument closet, figuring out how they worked, taking them apart, recombining them in ways that they shouldn't have been recombined, such as combining a trombone and a bassoon. And so to take the words from Peter Schickele, who does things like this too, it combined aspects of the trombone and the bassoon with the disadvantages of both. So into music, I didn't get to all the instruments, but I did get it up to about 15. And then when I found out the requirement for a degree in music education was that you had to learn all the instruments, well, that seemed to be the way to go. And that's exactly what I did. And that's part of the reason that I give music lessons to autistic individuals. Because in addition to the therapeutic benefits of engaging in music, and many people mistake me for a music therapist, which I'm not. I didn't get that degree. I didn't get the certification, even though there's therapeutic aspects to learning how to play music. I focus on learning the instrument. And once communication is established, however that is, then I have students all over the spectrum, and they're also all over the spectrum in terms of musical ability. Some could be professional musicians if they so chose. Others work harder at it. And then there are some students I haven't quite figured out how to teach yet, just like the general population. Music can be a great way to develop relationships, great way to engage in the community. However, music is a sensory activity. And I remember skipping a lot of jazz band rehearsals because the trumpets in the back, as a trombone player, it was just too loud. And there was so little known about autism or sensory issues, I couldn't convince the band director that something needed to be done. So like any good autistic person, I did my research, marched into the director's office with a bunch of alternate seating charts, and demanded he made a change. It didn't work. But now I know more about effective self-advocacy skills. So when looking at success in employment, it's really a matter of looking at the characteristics and matching them to attributes and possible positions. So what's the difference between doing that and what we do for a typical person who's trying to figure out what they want to do for a career? It's a trick question. There's nothing different. It's the same idea, same concept. Well, there's got to be a difference of some sort, or we wouldn't be talking about it. Well, there is a difference. And the difference is some of the efforts we might need to make may be more intense and more focused in particular areas. We might need to be a little bit more creative, such as in Japan when I was talking with a parent through a translator of a teenage child who he didn't speak very much and had a number of challenges, but one thing he liked to do, I learned, was to go into the basement, stick his finger under a faucet, and spray water all over the place. So what can her son do for employment? Where What opportunities exist where you can spray water at high pressure? Well, being a fireman is a really good one, but you need to have good back and forth spoken communication skills because you're either barking out commands or you're listening to other commands. So maybe not being a fireman. But there's other opportunities, power washing buildings, cars, sidewalks, whatever it might be. And if the kid was really into fire engines and all that type of stuff, maybe he could be the best fire engine washer on this side of the Mississippi. How many of you have seen a dirty fire engine? So that might be a possibility as well. It's also important to consider the different types of models and to go beyond the usual full and part-time standard employment that we so often think about, micro-enterprise, such as the fellow in Florida who's folding laundry, or like what I did in college. Well, I could fix bicycles. The choice was either some boring work-study job at minimum wage or fixing bikes. So I printed up thousands of these, I plastered the campus, and soon I had more bikes than I knew what to do with. There could be up to a dozen bicycles in various stages of repair and assembly on my side of the dorm room. And then I remember my sister asking me, how does your roommate feel about that? I mean, he's a photographer, isn't he? So she knew him to some extent. Well, yeah, he's a photographer. Well, how would you feel if he had camera equipment and lenses and tripods and bodies and whatnot all on his side of the room, even though it wasn't on yours? Well, when you ask an atypical person a typical question, you're going to get an answer you won't like. And I told her, well, I'd be fine with that. I'd probably take them apart and figure out how they work and all of it. And finally, she just pulled older sister rank, get the bikes out of the room. So I got most of them out. And everything seemed to be okay. On to college. That was a utopia. More friends. Dating occurs in college. Well, that's something that I never quite figured out. I remember spending a lot of time with this lady in undergrad school, and she told me that she likes hugs and back rubs. And my thought was, well, gee, I've got this brand new friend, and she doubles as a deep pressure temple grandin squeeze machine. Well, I guess she had other ideas. After a lot of conversation, I realized, well, I guess she wants to be my girlfriend. No, I'm not interested in dating right now, thank you very much. But that did tell me that there was this whole area of communication that we call nonverbal. Guess what became the next focused interest? And soon I had this big lexicon of nonverbal communication, which came in really handy some years later in graduate school after spending a lot of time with this lady, who then we started off reviewing each other's homeworks and doing things socially. And then one day at a beach, very much like this, she suddenly gave me a kiss, a hug, and held my hand. Well, now I had the story down. And went something like this. If a woman hugs you, kisses you, and holds your hand all at about the same time, it probably means they want to be your girlfriend. If that's the case, do not confuse a potential girlfriend for a temple grandin squeeze machine. You've got to have an answer right away. It could either be yes, no, or further investigation and analysis is indicated. Well, it seemed to be a good thing to do. Well, now we've been married for, I guess soon it will be 30 years. And if you want to find out what life is like on her side of the spectrum, then you can read her contributions to my book, Beyond the Wall. So now I spend most of my time here. Sheltered workshops do exist for people with Asperger's syndrome. There's a number of them around, and we spend months and years and lifetimes perseverating on subjects that nobody else wants to hear about. But we talk about them anyways. We force people to listen. Sometimes social interaction between community members could be improved. Some people refer to this place as a university. So employment experiences, employment and transitioning to adulthood, certainly I've had plenty of challenges in doing so. Finding a job was challenging. I had my special interest in bicycles as a teenager and young adult. That served really well in high school and into college. I remember my first formal job was working as cleaning tables at a noisy restaurant. Well, sensory issues, that just didn't work. So that made me realize that I needed to go back to my interest, bicycles. I got onto my bicycle that I built from the ground up, made the rounds of all the bike shops. I'd find the manager and nerd into my bicycle with the manager. And then after a period of time, I'd ask him for a job. And it took about 12 times, but eventually I got one. And now I had a job doing what I liked to do, and I could regulate my sensory input by fixing bikes in the back of the room or going to the front of the store and perseverating with customers about bicycles, except I think they called that selling bicycles. So that worked out pretty well. More formal job experience going through, after graduating from undergraduate school. In addition to studying music, I got interested in accounting. And after a while, I had more than half a degree in each. Since I couldn't decide which one to do, I ended up doing them both. Started working as an accountant, which, while crunching the numbers was fun, somehow didn't get along that well with the other employees, colleagues. They dressed funny. They dressed kind of like, I'm looking for someone who's wearing a suit and tie. There's not too many today. But anyways, suit and tie. Yeah, there we go in the back, yes. Yeah, okay, Stuart. All right, good example there. Stuart, stand up. No, you don't have to stand up. No. Anyways, for me, you might notice my clothing is kind of loose. I've got these really fancy shoes. I rode my bicycle to work. You can't do that, or at least you couldn't do that and be an accountant. When I worked in an accounting firm, and then later at State Street Bank, you couldn't do that. There were certain expectations, and how you dressed, how you looked, things that you like to do after work, such as drinking in bars. I wasn't interested in any of that. So then it was back to teaching. At first, business-related subjects such as accounting, economics, and computers, and then back to music, and eventually becoming a professor of music at a community college up in Boston, which worked really well until, and this is something that is important for us autistic people, until I broke some hidden curriculum rules that were very subtle. I mean, they don't seem subtle now, but they were then. And that was, I got this idea that I could get more interested in the music department by having different paths that people could take. So some people might major in electronic music, others might in music history, some might in some other category, and we doubled the enrollments in the music program as a result. So that all worked very well. However, the hidden curriculum that I missed was not consulting a long-term faculty member who taught a single course in the program, jazz band to be specific. So he was the chair of a different department, but since he had been there 20 years and I had only been there, well, I had just gotten there basically, and didn't ask for his advice, well, that caused all kinds of problems later on. Eventually to the point where he managed to get the music department closed, so then I would have to leave. And I think it's still closed. They still have courses, but there's no majors there. Anyways, that turned out for the better, and I ended up where I am now at Adelphi University, teaching courses in special education, mostly autism. And what is another important thing that autistic people need is mentors. Having people you can trust on the job site. And still at Adelphi University, there's a number of people that I will ask either to translate or to decode certain things that happen perhaps in meetings or encounters with people, or if I'm going to make a move of some sort, ask somebody something, or make some plans. This is what I plan to do. Am I asking all the right people? Is there somebody who feels they need to be included, whether they really need to be included or not? Do I still need to ask them and at least pretend to listen to their advice, whether I do or not? So these are some subtle hidden curriculum things that are so important for individuals on the autism spectrum to be aware of. We can learn these things, but many times it takes direct instruction and a lot of cognitive thought, with a very crisply pronounced T at that. So, as I close my presentation, the question is autism a series of deficit, disorder, and disability, or is it a set of abilities? And what are some situations where you can transform what might be considered a weakness or a challenge into a strength? So here I've got 3 examples commonly thought of as challenges or deficits, but they could actually be used as strengths. So as I'm talking about turning what might be considered a challenge into a strength, I'm wondering if anybody has an example of where they might have done that or helped somebody do that or just seen somebody do that. Kind of a off the top of your head type of question. And I see some people thinking really, really hard. I see Bridget thinking hard. Oh, we got a response in the back. We're going to go 1, 2. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's a great example. Working in a pharmacy, making sure everything is up to date and medicine goes in the right quantity, not expired, to people who need it. Bridget had her hand up, so. All right, well, there you go. And we got another one over here. Oh, that's a great example. So he's working through something, serving as a buffer, the camera's a buffer, and at the same time, it's also an area of strength. It looks like Andy's got his hand up. That's great. And does he enjoy doing that? So what more could you want? Yes. All right, that's great. So we're seeing a number of examples where something that might have originally be considered as a weakness, deficit, disorder, disability, um, perhaps a need for proprioception, a huge need for proprioception, as Andy mentioned, tossing heavy containers into ships and so on. These are all examples of autistic people using our abilities, using our strengths. Now, that said, as I mentioned before, there are challenges, and we do have to be aware of them. We have to accommodate for them. We have to remediate for them. However, at the same time, we need to be aware of those strengths, where we can have situations where autistic people are outperforming non-autistic people, specifically because we're autistic. So as we turn away from closed doors to open ones of abilities, success, and productivity, what is success? And I think as long as we have people who are productive and fulfilled with their lives, they're probably successful. And it's a journey. As we move from goal to goal, from activity to activity, move onwards, increasing our areas of success, how do you know when someone's successful? And I think if we can get someone, autistic or otherwise, through an experience, it might be a therapy session, it might be a class, it might be a job exploration, whatever it might be, if that person comes out of the experience knowing even one thing more about how to successfully interact with their environment, then that's a success. And likewise for all of us here. If we get through our 2 days together and you've learned even just one thing about autistic people and promoting success as we move to the 70 to 80% of the rest of our lives, and that is as adults, then that's a success for all of you here. And I thank all of you for your efforts in doing what you can to promote success and moving to where it becomes the rule rather than the exception. Thank you very much.